Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all, this time covering two books by two masters of science fiction um, and of fantasy writing, although in this case these are both broadly science fiction stories, I guess. The Island of Dr. Death and other stories has some kind of fantasy stuff going on in some of the stories, but a lot of it is kind of Gene Wolfe's particular blend of science fiction through a kind of a different lens, basically kind of a ignorant lens in some ways, not on the part of the authorship at all, but the character of not understanding, the people in the world, not necessarily understanding the science fictiony elements that they are exposed to or having to kind of think about things in their world in interesting ways. That there are a number of Gene Wolfe books that have elements of that, and this one in particular has more than a few. But I'm going to start with Creatures of Light and Darkness. Roger Zelazny. I've now read a couple of his books, although I haven't read his Amber series, which surely at some point I need to. Um, but I recently reread Lord of Light, and I read This Immortal, which is his sort of take on the idea of the kind of Odysseus story. Basically, the main character is maybe um, certainly inspired by, and maybe himself as this kind of perpetually undying version of Odysseus who lives in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. And it's great, super fun. Creatures of Light and Darkness is another sort of blend of sci-fi and mythology. It is about Egyptian mythology, and so the two planets, the House of Life and the House of the Dead, at kind of either end of the galaxy, and between them the flowing of life and death. Anubis ruling over one side of existence and Osiris ruling over the other, and they send out their minions into the world to do all sorts of strange and interesting things. Um, and I guess I will kind of uh, not try to give really a summary of what happens in the book, because what happens is strange and disjointed and not really why you read a book like this. I think the other kind of Zelazny mythic sci-fi stories have a lot more of kind of a cohesive narrative, and this one doesn't really always cohere in the same way. There's a lot of kind of strange and interesting things that are fun to read about, but aren't necessarily the kind of main through line of the story. Um, and I think that probably takes away from it for the people who don't like that. But if you are someone like me who really is just fascinated by all of these wonderful Roger Zelazny stories, you might decide that you really like Creatures of Light and Darkness, because I think there are some parts of it that are really pretty spectacular. Some pretty impressive Zelaznian writing moments. And in fact, I sent a message to some friends on Discord of one of them, and I thought I would read it here on the Pellam's Wasteland Reads podcast, or YouTube channel, or whatever you want to call it. Um, anyway, from Roger Zelazny, Creatures of Light and Darkness. Now everyone knows that some machines make love beyond the metaphysical writings of St. Jake's the Mechanophile, who posits man as the sexual organ of the machine which created him, and whose existence is necessary to fulfill the destiny of mechanism, producing generation after generation of machine kind, all the modes of mechanical evolution flowing through man until such a time as he has served his purpose perfection has been reached and the great castration may occur. St. Jake's is, of course, a heretic. And I just really loved. I mean, there are a bunch of great passages in Creatures of Light and Darkness, but that one in particular, I just had so much fun reading the first time that I sent it to friends online and was like, yeah, well, I should read it for you all because I'm not really going to talk very much about kind of what happens in the story because, like I said, this is not a story that you, not a novel that you read or a novella maybe depending on your definitions that you read based on what happens so much as reading to be um, fascinated by and enmeshed in Roger Zelazny's sense of mythic sci-fi and how he writes and all that sort of stuff, and it's great. So that's Creatures of Light and Darkness. I recommend it, but I'm gonna try not to say too much more about it because it's crazy. Now, the Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories is different in that it is a collection of short stories by Gene Wolfe. And in fact, as you might guess from the title, the titular short story is The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. So the collection is an additional and other stories, um, which is great. It's very kind of the type of playfulness that's in a lot of these Gene Wolfe books. And there are, in fact, a whole set of stories that have these kind of interrelated titles. So there's The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, and The Death of Dr. Island, and The Doctor of Death Island. And all three of these are very different in their own ways. And there are a lot of other stories mixed in with all of the different things in here, which is, great, great fun. There's some really serious kind of banger sci-fi in this one. Um, the island. I'll talk about a couple of them. How about that? So for instance, the first, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, is the title of a book that our protagonist is reading. And he's kind of a young man who is in an uncomfortable and imperfect life situation. But he's, I don't know, I don't remember exactly how old he's supposed to be, but he's a child, and doesn't totally understand like what's going on. Um, but he begins to have these visions of these kind of moments of interaction with characters from this book, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. And he sort of works through some of the things going on in his life through interacting with these characters that exist within this book. And there are excerpts from the book, and then there's also these interactions, and then there's the sort of real life happenings. And there's a great kind of way that all of these things are interlaced together, and we get a more subtle understanding of what's going on than perhaps our protagonist himself possesses through layering these different elements. That's a lot of fun. Another one, there's a story in here called Alien Stones that is about essentially attempting to do a sort of archaeological understanding of a spaceship, a spaceship that our characters are on one spaceship and they find another spaceship and are attempting to understand the nature of the culture that produced it. They don't know about any aliens. There have never been any aliens reported in the universe as known, and there are all these different kind of divided up human empires or polities or however it works out. So they theorize that it is probably a spaceship of human manufacture, but it is immense and it is um, host to all of these kind of complex mechanical elements, and they don't totally understand what's going on, but they are sort of attempting to, by interacting with this thing, understand how it works, and it becomes a real kind of, a meeting point of civilizations type story in some sense, even though there's no like real, it's sort of almost more like a prelude to that, I guess, in some sense. There's a really fun way that all of the things get resolved in that story, and I like it a lot, as a one little sci-fi story that is full of all of this kind of wonderful implied world existence outside the existence of this one little story. It's great. And here I'll talk about one more. The very last story in the collection um, is about a man who is on a sort of kind of like the old idea of the European Grand Tour, except he is from I don't remember specifically where in the Middle East he's from. Maybe Baghdad specifically, although I don't remember for certain. Um, and America, like the United States, has gone through this immense catastrophic destruction, and is now a sort of political and cultural backwater with all of these um, littered detritus elements from the old civilization, right? The civilization that rose in the 20th and maybe even into the 21st century, and that has collapsed here. Um, and so he is this kind of young man with a lot of clout and money, and is having his fun finding out about the different things. And there's this great kind of gothic atmosphere to all of these elements. The because of course, right, the gothic, right, like the reason it's set in like decayed buildings, because the decayed buildings are the mind, things like that. And so there's this sense of the decayed, crumbling ruins of an earlier age, and the way that um, enmeshes with the sense of deeper layers of existence, and all of the kind of ways that a person is kind of more than what you can just interact with. And there's a great um, detail of a character who is talking about the idea of writing as a surrogate of speech, which is itself a surrogate of other sensory organs, and especially of scent. So the idea is that speech arises when a person is too far from another person to smell precisely the pheromones or chemicals or whatever that are being released. And then writing is a means of artificially creating something like the speech that is taking the place of that sensory relationship. And then our character gets a note from a woman with her perfume on it, and it's such a perfect and wonderful um, detail mixed in with this story that is tied so much in to all of this these kind of thematic issues of um, kind of presence and awareness, and the kind of underlying issues that are not seen. And there's a lot of there's multiple plays put on in that one, and this idea of people, a person as an actor playing a character, but also being a character even when they're not playing a character on stage, and all this great stuff that is really really fun, and is kind of just so much of like what I think is the fun stuff of Gene Wolfe. So much of the um, very very clever and very thematically and symbolically dense, and just wonderful to read, and speaks to why I enjoy his books so much. So anyway, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories. Really fun collection. I've read a couple of Gene Wolfe collections, at least one or two others, maybe more than that. I've read a number of his short stories outside of specific collections also, but he has a number of, and since he died a couple of years ago, there's a best of Gene Wolfe collection that I'm sure has a bunch of good stuff in it too. But this one is a collection apparently from 1980 of his short stories that is great. It's super, super fun. Can hardly recommend it enough if you like um, the kind of inventive and weird stuff that Gene Wolfe liked to write about. So yeah. Yeah, that's the two for today. Creatures of Light and Darkness, a short novel or a novella, and The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories, a short story collection. Both of them super fun and totally worth checking out, especially if you are at all familiar with either of these authors. I think, if you're a Zelazny fan or a Wolf fan, you will probably like what you find in either of these. And if you're a fan of one and don't know about the other, I mean, this is kind of, uh, I think there's a overlap between the material here, this kind of mythic treatment of sci-fi and this idea of kind of uh, science fiction as a vehicle for a story instead of just a vehicle for um, like scientific theories and all that sort of stuff. And there's kind of a similarity of treatment here, I guess I would say that if you are a Zelazny fan who hasn't read any Wolf, or if you're a Wolf fan who hasn't read any Zelazny, you could definitely do worse than starting here with either of these. But that is going to do it for me for today. So leave a comment down below if you have read these, know about them, have opinions about them, all that sort of stuff. Otherwise, I've been live from Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.